Projector, I can't see any of you. I'm Art Dula. I'm a lawyer from Houston, Texas. And, you know, Houston is a place where people have spent a lot of money drilling little 10-inch holes down into the ground for 20 or 30,000 feet. And sometimes, this is working, right?
Yep.
Sometimes at the bottom of them holes, there's some oil. But a revoltingly large amount of the time at the bottom of them holes, there isn't any oil. And I'm going to try to talk to you about some of the practical things. We've had an excellent discourse on the law of space here. I also teach space law. I'm going to have you come down to Houston and teach my students. But I tell my students that the first thing I want them to do is to go out and form a Texas corporation. I don't care what they do with it. I want them to have a corporation. So if they want to do something with it, they can. I'm a little bit hoarse because 24 hours ago I was in Bangkok. I just got back from talking to the Chinese space program. Don't tell the State Department I don't want to be arrested. And when I came back through customs, you know, they don't call it customs anymore. They call it securing the homeland, the fatherland, and border protection. And the guy, a friendly enough guy, he said, "What do you do for a living, Mr. Dula?" And man, I had to think about that, because if I tell him I'm trying to build a space program, he's going to take me into a room and couple me to a metal desk with a short length of handcuffs. So I said, "I'm a space lawyer." Space lawyer. And he thought about it for a while. And he said, "You mean like up there?" I said, yeah, like up there. And he thought about it for a minute, and he gave what I think is an accurate response. "We ought to send a lot of lawyers up there." Well, folks, now look, I'm in the business of trying to start a private space program, so I'm not going to make as much sense as the professor did here, but I want to show you a few things. This is a space rock. You've seen little space rocks. This is a great big space rock. I think this is Harrison Schmitt, right? That's better known as, well, never mind what he's better known as, but Harrison is a geologist. He's the only scientist we ever sent to the moon. We spent $30 billion. 27 people went to the moon. 12 landed on it. Nobody has gone further than the moon, except those poor suckers in Apollo 13, which kind of had to go a little bit beyond the moon, but got to come home, thank God. This is what we're after. We want them, space rocks. This rock is half oxygen, more than half oxygen. Now the question is, can we own it? And Mike called me up and he said, "All right, I want you to tell them whether or not you can own the space rock." You can own the space rock. I know this. How do I know this? It's because I sold one. I'm the only person in the world that's ever sold a space rock and not been investigated and arrested by the NASA Attorney General's office. The Korolev family, who ran the Russian space program, got given a space rock from the Luna 24 mission. And the granddaughter asked me to sell it for at Sotheby's in 1993. And so I did. And it was about 10 milligrams, and it sold for $660,000. Now, I got 10%. I'm a 10%er, okay? So I made money. I made what's called a profit. This is a word I would like to introduce to the NASA lexicon, profit. It's something they don't understand yet. There is a socialist space program. It's here. There is a capitalist space program. It's in Russia. It's important, and it has to do with the law. So at any rate, I sold it. There was a big investigation because they found out how much it sold for. It's all legal. So that's the only sale that's ever occurred. But it has occurred. And on top of that, I can prove it with a U.S. court case. There was a kid who wanted to impress his girlfriend, so he stole some moon rocks, scattered them on a bed, made love to his girlfriend. He then wrote a book called Making Love on the Moon. He got arrested. He got put in prison. But the important thing is he was convicted in a federal court of theft. And one of the elements of theft is that you have to own the thing that is being stolen. If you don't own it, you don't have any standing to bring an action for theft. So there's U.S. federal law that says if you go to the moon and you get a moon rock or 100 tons of moon rocks or 1,000,000 tons of moon rocks, you can own them, you can sell them, you can make a profit on them. Okay. Now, wait. This is true, but I'm not that, my God, this thing doesn't work. I want to go back. Okay, now. See this? Everybody know what that is? What is it? Louder. Saturn. Right. Now, do you see that tiny little dot right up there? Tiny, little. What is that? We're all on that little dot. Everything we've ever loved, everything we've ever thought about is on that little dot. All of our wealth is on that little dot. It is little. It is a dot. Saturn is bigger. Okay. You get the message. Most of the resources aren't on the dot. Most of the wealth isn't on the dot. Law exists to solve problems. The first thing I teach my space law students is ask them, what is law? They don't know. They're trained as technicians. They don't know what law is. Law is a way of resolving disputes. We've only got two ways. What's the other way? Warfare, yeah. So law, even when it's bad, is good. Now, by the way, you're doing better than my freshman space law class. Freshmen, they're third-year law students, smart third-year law students. Or you can solve the problem afterwards by having a court case of some kind, which means somebody's got to have sovereignty, because for the court to work, it's got to have something called jurisdiction, and jurisdiction is nothing but power. That's why the cop that comes out to serve you with a lawsuit has a gun. If you shoot him, they're going to send more cops with more guns. If you shoot them, they're going to send the army. After that, they nuke you. Okay, if that doesn't work, you're sovereign. I told you I teach you some law. I guarantee you that is good. Isn't that good international law? Okay. So what problems are we trying to solve? There's just four, only four problems. You can take notes. There'll be a quiz later. First, biggest problem. It's too damn expensive to go into space. It costs $10,000 a kilo. Now, if you had to, going into space is just a matter of adding energy to a system. And if you got that energy out of a wall socket, it'd cost $1.50 to get a kilogram to space. If you got it out of burning chemical propellants without a rocket, just the energy, it'd cost about $25. But it costs us $25? No, it costs us $10,000 a kilo. Well, I can tell you how to make it cheaper. Build more rockets. If you build 100 times as many rockets, the price will decline by 90%. This is the advice of Henry Ford. It's the advice of a guy named Kaiser, who one time built a whole aircraft carrier in 24 hours. NASA needs to learn about these things. Elon Musk is trying to teach them. Unfortunately, Elon has had to take $800 million in government money to get where he is. So I'm sorry to say he's highly subsidized. It's too expensive. I won't go into space elevators and stuff like that. I don't have enough time. We are too risk averse. Way too risk averse. If we did early airplanes like we're doing early rockets, there would not be an airplane. You could forget about it. I tried to make a list of the people who died flying airplanes from 1904 to 1914. When I got to 1,000 people in the United States, I stopped looking at the microfilm. I have the names of 1,000 people who died in that 10-year period trying to fly airplanes. Yet somehow now, today, in 2012, it is safer to ride in an airplane than it is to sit in this auditorium. So get over it. We have to take risks or we'll never do anything. Risk is a ratio. Risk is a ratio. Okay. Now I'm going to put a plug in for my company. Use what works. Make a profit first, then innovate. We're taking old Russian equipment and we're making it into spaceships. We have 2 lunar spaceships. Each of them is 6 times as big as the Orion. We announced on the 19th of June that we're forming the first expedition, private, to go to the moon. No government subsidy. Hell, we take the government subsidy. We haven't been able to figure out how to get them to give it to us. And finally, respect experts. Now, originally this slide read defy experts, but I gave this talk to 4 universities in China last week. And they said, Art, you can't say defy experts in this country. They will, bad things will happen. I said, I'm leaving. They'll happen to me, they said, my host. And so I said, respect experts, but realize they're usually wrong. Let me give you an example. And I'm not going to take it from space. There was a guy who built a computer when the biggest company in the world said nobody would buy a computer. His name is Jobs. He's dead now. So I can talk about him without fear of libel or slander. Look, he went to Intel because he used an Intel 8086. And he said, please let me work for you. We'll make computers, we'll get rich. They said, get out of our office, you're crazy. We've been told by IBM nobody's going to buy a personal computer. He then said, I've got to go to somebody that has a computer. He went to Digital Equipment Corporation. He said, you don't even have to pay me. I will work for free. Let me make the computer, we'll get rich. They said, you don't have a college degree, get out of my office. And you know something? The little company he started is worth $600 billion now. It's the most valuable company in the world. Now, I'm going to talk to you about 2 guys. This is my Chinese hero. His name is Ho. First name's Zhang. He was a eunuch. That's the bad part. The good part is that he went all over the Pacific. See, you see all those little tracks across the Pacific, and he did it with gigantic fleets of hundreds of ships, tens of thousands of sailors, infinite amount of money from the emperor. It was the NASA space program of the 15th century. It failed completely. Despite the fact hundreds of ships, thousands of sailors, billions of dollars, it failed because it did not make a profit. And when the emperor needed the money to fight the Manchus in Manchuria, he said, lock the ships up. And then the Confucian scholars, the bureaucrats, and I won't tell you who they remind me of in the government, but they burnt all the records. And we're only now finding out how far this guy went and what he did. This is my Italian hero. He was a crazy individual. He thought he could get to Japan and the Spice Islands to make a profit by sailing west. The experts knew he was wrong. He went to Prince Henry the Navigator. The Board of Navigation said the Earth's 24,000 miles in diameter. Yes, we know it's a sphere. Your ships can't go that far. And they were right. But what they didn't know was that North America was between Asia and Europe. Now, Columbus went to somebody who didn't know as much as Prince Henry. He went to the Spanish court, and he raised half of the money privately. This is what nobody in my history class knows. Half of the money Columbus raised privately. All that the people at the court did was give him a couple of ships that they'd seized because they were smugglers. They were little ships, 85 feet long. That's the biggest one. Okay. Now, he didn't know where he was going. He didn't know where he'd been. He went back after the 4th mission in chains. He made a profit. Now, here's a comparison. Zheng He had essentially unlimited money, thousands and thousands. Columbus had 90 people, 3 ships. Vasco da Gama, 160 people, 4 ships. Magellan, 265 people, 5 ships. Look at the force imbalance there. It isn't NASA that's going to get us to the moon or Mars. It is small private companies that are just coming into existence now. The biggest companies of the 21st century haven't been formed yet. Look at the difference in the size of those ships. I stood on a replica last week of one of those ships, and that one ship could have blown all the navies of Europe right out of the water. But they never got to Europe. If they did, we'd be having this conversation in Mandarin Chinese. Okay, now, this is the actual contract. This is law, this is law. This is the actual contract language translated from the Spanish, and it shows that when Columbus, to get half of the money, the ships, gave up 90% of everything he found to the King of Spain. I should mention the king never paid him the 10%. His family maintained a lawsuit for 100 years, lost. But the year after, again, this is a translation into English from the Latin, the United Nations, pardon me, the Pope, gave the whole New World to Spain. Later, Portugal objected they had to divide it between Spain and Portugal. But the first grant of the New World from the leading international authority was to the King of Spain. So who made the profit? The King of Spain made the profit. Then he said, I made a good profit, but I gave Columbus too much. I gave him 10%. I'm not going to pay it, but I gave him too much. So I'm going to give Magellan 5%. 5%. And Magellan put together 5 ships, 250 people. First voyage around the world, very famous, one of the great voyages of exploration. He lost all but 18 of the men. He lost all but one of the ships. He lost his life. And it's still a huge success. Now imagine if he had had the risk rules of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration apply to that voyage. He would have built the ships, but he would have never taken them out of port. I've got news for NASA. That's not why we build ships. Okay. No, okay, I'm going to come 20th century. Langley, this guy, leading expert in aeronautics in the whole world, had the biggest grant from the War Department that's ever been given. Flush with money, all the experts. He tried to build this, but he did not know how to control it. And so it did that, and it kept doing that. But he's the expert, so they kept giving him money. Sound familiar? Yeah. Sound familiar? Yes. Meanwhile, 2 amateurs, poor men, bicycle mechanics. They had a bicycle shop. Here's their bicycle shop. With profit from their bicycle shop, they built this because they had discovered how to warp the wing. They knew how to control it. It worked fine. When Langley heard about it, he didn't believe it. When they brought it to Washington and flew it, he got pissed off and he stopped. As a result, we now have a commercial crew program. My company's in this program. We're not getting money, but we are getting knowledge. And by the way, there's our spacecraft on the left. And we're working with these guys. It's a big team. This is an advertisement for my company, and here's what it looks like. Now, have I got 2 more minutes to talk about law?
2 more minutes.
Okay. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 says that you have a right to use the resources of space. It does not place a limitation on the word use. Therefore, in American law, it is the dictionary definition, and it includes commercial use. There is a right of non-interference, which has been carefully pointed out. The other people can't interfere with you. Now, I don't know if you have a right to collective and individual self-defense or not, but I know the United Nations Charter allows the right. That treaty applies to the United States, not to individuals. Individuals derive their rights from the laws of the country they're in. In the United States, the fundamental law is the Constitution. The 10th Amendment of the Constitution says that any right not reserved to the federal government or delegated to the states passes to the states and to the people. Therefore, there is a positive right to do anything that is not illegal. Therefore, right now, you have a positive right to form a corporation, go to the moon and mine it, or an asteroid, or Mars, and to own that material. Now, America's only 5% of the world. The other 95%, most of it, all the minerals are owned by the government. And this is the big problem internationally, is those governments cannot conceive of private ownership of minerals. If you're in Indonesia and you discover oil on your land, it is a disaster because it means the Indonesian oil company is going to throw your family off your land. That's our spacecraft. It's big. And this is where we're going to be working. Now, we found a niche market. We found a market beyond low Earth orbit that doesn't have to be subsidized. Our studies by Foodtron Corporation in Washington tell us that 30 people will pay $150 million each to get to the moon. We've just got to find them. So, I've got stuff about Hall thrusters and advanced planning and stuff like that. You're not interested in that. Descent capsules. How about studies in Ukraine to use the Soviet landers to get back to the surface of the moon, specifically 1 ton of payload to the South Pole? Why are we doing it? Here he is. This is the guy. He's a school child in Britain. We went over there and put spacesuits on school children. Why? Because once that happens, you never give up wanting to go into space. Finally, let me ask you, would you invest with these hippies, these bearded hippies?
Yes.
Would it help any if I said the one in the lower left is Bill Gates, and that Paul Allen is the guy with the giant beard? I think you get the idea. Thank you very much.
We do have a few.
Mike?
Okay, our next speaker is running about 5 or so minutes late, so we do have a few moments for questions. We do have people here on the panel with the Space Development Association, but one thing I did want to do would be to open to a couple of questions in the audience. And I noticed that we have had an interpreter the whole time. Is there anyone to whom you're interpreting that you would like to share a question from?
I don't have a question at this time, actually.
Okay, that's fine. Wanted to make sure you weren't left out. Yes, all the way there, the check shirt. Yes.
So a lot of this law was written a while ago, and it's very broad. So I'm curious your opinion. Do we need amendments to old laws or new laws, or what's the process for modernizing all of this?
Do you want to start with that, Matt?
Actually, I don't think there's need to update the broad principles. Reopening the broad principles could actually untangle a whole bunch of consensus around those broad principles. And again, I think you heard from the panel that when it comes to commercial activities in space, the Outer Space Treaty, by the way, foresaw commercial activities. The Soviet Union tried to get the treaty written such that only states, only countries could be active in space, and the U.S. resisted that. Now, the trade-off was that the U.S. government is responsible for its non-governmental activities in outer space, and that was the trade-off, and we have to provide supervision and authorization for our non-governmental or commercial activities. But actually don't think there needs to be a reopening of the treaties. A lot of the details can be filled in through national space legislation. And I think there'd be some risk, actually, to commercial activities opening the OST up.
Yes, right here. Oh, did you have something you wanted to add, Art?
There's a General Assembly resolution that says that national law should fill in what the meaning of the treaty is. And in the United States, a federal law is equal to a treaty. So if a federal law is passed after the treaty is passed and they're inconsistent, the federal law controls.
And in fact, the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space has actually spent a fair amount of time in its last 2 legal subcommittees looking at national law as a primary source for international behavior. So there is a great deal of power in that national law. Yes. I would also like to have some of the people here, and Declan will get involved. Yes. Right.
What are the considerations in our current space law for moving a celestial object orbit, specifically an asteroid, either because somebody thinks it might hit Earth or to ease its exploitation, moving it into former Earth objects? What is the right of other nations to object to that or stop that process?
Yeah.
We actually had a conference that was co-sponsored with the Association of Space Explorers, and Rusty Schweikert was co-chairing this group. And so if there is a near-Earth object or asteroid that's threatening the Earth, you can be assured someone is going to take action. And so one of the things that group was trying to look at was how would that decision be made? Because the interesting thing is, if you deflect the asteroid, of course the point is to deflect it totally away from Earth altogether, right? But you do create a slightly higher risk for some countries versus others depending on which way you deflect. And so their proposal was to get, and obviously the Security Council could act on it, but they wanted to get some mechanism in place in advance so that obviously the criteria would be neutral and agreed to in advance. But the UN Charter and general international law is brought into the Outer Space Treaty, and certainly countries would have a right to take action against an asteroid threatening Earth.
Follow-up, if it were a matter of commercial exploitation, for example, there's been discussion moving asteroids into Earth or moon orbit to be able to exploit it more easily, would Ghana or Myanmar or Bolivia say, well, wait a moment, we don't agree to that unless you do something for us in return to not object?
What was the question?
If someone wants to commercially move an asteroid to make it easier to mine it.
To mine?
To mine. Can you move an asteroid from its current orbit to make it easier to mine?
Sounds like use to me. Technically, though, if you look at it, what you have to do is you have to beneficiate the material in some way. For example, by removing the ore from its place. Now, you can remove ore, for example, by digging with a shovel, or picking up a rock with a pair of tongs. But you could also use a rocket engine or some other means to take and move a small celestial body. We don't have any definition of what a celestial body is. It may be the moon for sure, but what if it's the size of a grain of sand? These laws have to be developed, but under current law, you have a right to use celestial bodies, and it can be commercial use. So you would be able to move it. On the other hand, you're never going to get a launch license to get your spacecraft off of the Earth unless you prove you can do it safely, because safety is one of the review criteria in all countries that have launch licenses.
And one of the elements of that would be that if you, as an American, brought in that asteroid and did create a disaster, you might be liable to the United States, but the United States is liable to the world under the space law, under the space treaty, so that would be. I see a question from one of the.
I have a question now with you. Suppose that if both people wanted to get a hold of the asteroids at the same time, what would be the process to resolve that conflict?
The question is, if there was a conflict in which two different parties wanted to claim and use the same asteroid at the same time, what would be the method for resolving that conflict?
That's one of those situations that gets into the level of granularity where the law doesn't quite address it yet, right? So I should add, in response to the prior question, the FAA currently has launch and reentry licensing authority, but does not have in-orbit regulatory authority yet. So that's sort of an issue that's going to come up as we talk about all these different types of activities. But that would be certainly something, and the smaller the asteroid, you get into the situation where you have the rights to the resources, but not to the surface or subsurface. So by moving it, are you claiming a property right, or is it simply a use to get the resource? So that's the tension you get into once you get into smaller bodies and these types of questions. But it's a great question.
Declan, you've had a lot of experience thinking about a number of these issues. This is a great chance maybe for you to jump in and share some of that.
Oh, thanks so much. I don't know, is anybody here from this thing? It's on, okay, good, so am I. The overriding and overarching principle, I think, in determining these laws and how they're applied and how we interpret them is a field called politics. And it begs the question, how does our community get recognized and get our issues tended to politically. And I suppose there's 100 different answers to that, but the one that occurred to me was that our groups now of space activists is larger than ever before. And I think it might be time for our groups to have a presidential nominee, at least a candidate. Now, let me tell you why. You only have to be a candidate for a rather short period of time to get on the political agenda any issue. And I'm thinking that, although it wasn't why I was nominated to sit here, it would be a terrific idea if our various advocacy groups nominated a committee to get 4 years from now a candidate that was the outer space candidate. And I'm telling you, it would make a big difference. The language in America would change. Our federal laws would become responsive. And the President of the United States, whether it was that candidate or another one, would have to constantly answer questions about outer space. I don't know who wants to serve on that committee, but
Well, our next speaker has arrived, and I thank you for being an attentive and interesting audience, and I look forward to your continuing to contribute to the debate about how we make the rules that help us to resolve the conflicts that we hope will occur, because it'll mean there's human presence in space. Thank you.